Has anyone ever told you that God will never give you more than you can handle? Maybe you experienced a personal loss or tragedy, and a loved one, in an attempt to encourage, states that phrase. While it seems biblical, it's not. And before we get too upset with such a person, let's give some mercy towards those who use this phrase. I think they generally are trying to be helpful, encouraging, and useful, but there are some unsavory implications to the phrase itself. If God won't give us more than we can handle, that means that you could endure the tragedy while others couldn't. It seems like a twisted form of favoritism, and you're on the losing end. There are no scriptures that directly state that phrase, but many do connect it to 1 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 13, which says, "No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation he will also provide a way for escape that you may be able to endure it." The problem is, this verse is about temptation, not just suffering and trials in general, and the context helps us understand why it's here. Verse 12 warns the Corinthians not to be so proud because pride goes before the fall, to quote the proverb. And verses 1 through 11 before that show that the Old Testament Israelites, who thought they were so righteous and holy because God chose them, actually ended up serving as the example for how pride led to their spiritual downfall, with four examples of it. So, based on Israel's examples and Paul's warning to the Corinthians, chapter 10, verse 13 teaches us that when temptation comes, don't puff up with pride, but flee. God will provide an escape from temptation. Looking at the scripture really doesn't solve the dilemma of the video, though, does it? If the phrase, God will not give you more than you can handle, isn't in the Bible, and if 10, verse 13 is about temptation, how do we comfort people in distress? It's important to distinguish what may be causing a distress. And for that, let's think about how trials and temptations are actually two different things. A trial is a test or a tribulation intended to help us grow, and a trial can be God given. It can also be a byproduct of living in the fallen world. According to Romans 5 3 through 5, the growth from a trial happens like this: something happens that is devastating and breaks us. And eventually, through prayer and fellowship, worship, discovery, for example, we develop perseverance to this powerful event. And this inner strength molds our character. We have a new perspective, and that leads to a renewed sense of hope in God. And how does that help? Well, just wait to the next trial, and you'll feel the difference in strength and wisdom from the previous trial. A temptation, however, is different. It's designed to make you spiritually fall from grace by disobeying God's will. And it can come from the fallen world or the devil, but it also comes from our own evil desires. It doesn't, however, start with God. And that's a huge difference. James 1, verse 13 through 15 says, "Let no one say when he has been tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desires. Then, desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death." Temptation involves a choice concerning God's will, but instead of making it fair, a temptation is like adding a seductive element to our evil desires. Is it sinful then to be tempted? No, it isn't a sin to face temptation. Why not? Because Jesus was tempted. Hebrews 4:15 says that he was tempted in all ways like us, yet remained sinless. And that means that Jesus faced the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, and yet he fled from sin instead of embracing it. And through Jesus Christ, we can overcome temptation too. But this video still needs to make sense of God giving us more than we can handle, right? If it's not about temptation, but trials, why are we given more than we can handle? And for that, we're going to consider 2 Corinthians 1. Paul establishes in this section that God is a God of all comforts. 10 times in 5 verses, Paul explains how God's comfort is supposed to work. And God's comfort is associated with overcoming trials. How? Listen to 2 Corinthians 1 8 and 9. "For we do not want you to be unaware, brothers, of the affliction we experienced in Asia. For we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired even of life itself. Indeed, we felt we had received a sentence of death, but that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead." What afflictions did Paul experience? Well, there's several possibilities, including murder plots, riots, stonings, animal attacks. And through all these, Paul realized that trials gave us the opportunity to reprioritize our mindset and help us rely on God instead of trying to handle it ourselves. God will give us more than we can handle. So be ready. By living in a fallen world, be prepared to experience sorrow and pain and agony in ways that sometimes seem impossible to endure. And it's in these moments when we realize how much we really need God. In Matthew 11, verse 28, Jesus says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Part of the good news is that while we are given more than we can handle in this life, we don't have to carry these burdens alone.